IU basketball is back. IU football is in the middle of one of its best seasons in program history, and IU men's soccer is doing IU men's soccer things. We're going to cover it all on this edition of East 17th Street. Hey everybody, it's Mike Schumann of the Daily Hoosier, joined by Owen Graham of the Daily Hoosier and an imposter known as Seth Tao.
Happy Halloween, folks.
For people not watching on YouTube, Seth, I don't know what's going on here. Why don't you go ahead and describe this?
Oh, it's a ghost mask thingy, one of those like ghost skull mask thingies. And with my Washington Commanders Terry McLaurin jersey, I'm Scary Terry.
Okay. Well, as I mentioned offline, if people noticed last week, Seth had a Ravens shirt on, so I would say pretty much anything is an upgrade over that as a Steelers fan myself. So I guess we're making progress here is where I'll leave it. But I want to start with last night, guys. 95-27. That is just a eye-popping score, even for an exhibition game. Owen, how much of that was Indiana and how much of that was Maryville?
I mean, I'd have to point a lot of it towards Indiana offensively. I mean, they kind of just did what they needed to do. They ran a lot of simple sets, but they got open shots. But their defense, it was great. I think the final was that they only allowed 9 made field goals against Maryville. So that is, a very impressive number. And their perimeter defense is going to be really good this year. I mean, Chloe Moore McNeil, she's, possibly one of the best defenders in the Big Ten, maybe even the country on the perimeter. And Lily Meister has also shown that she has filled that center spot really well so far. I mean, again, it's only the first exhibition in Maryville, had their struggles as well. It kind of seems like sometimes offensively it was just 1-2 passes and then, put the ball up. And they weren't really running any maybe kind of organized offense, at least from my point of view. So I think, Indiana's a lot to credit on the defensive side, and I guess both sides of the ball. I mean, heck, they beat them over like 50 points. So, but yeah, in Indiana, it really looks like they didn't miss a step from their previous season. And they look to really be an impressive squad heading into the regular season as well.
Yeah, Seth, probably the biggest question on my mind coming into this season is, replacing Mackenzie Holmes. Obviously I don't think anybody's going to do that on their own, but if you could give me your thoughts on kind of a compare and contrast Meister with Holmes. When I think of Mackenzie Holmes, I think of elite post skills. Like she's just mastered the art of playing the post. Is Meister that same kind of player, or does she step out more? And how does Caroline Striplin kind of fit into this equation as well?
I think Meister can be that kind of player. I mean, she's always, she's had limited opportunity through her first 2 seasons, but she was always really efficient when she was out there. I remember like the last couple of years, I think her, especially on the rebounding, her rebounds per 40 were one of the best on the team over the last couple of years. Just obviously it was in limited minutes. So, she only was out there so much. She definitely stepped out a little bit. She stepped out a good amount last night. She wasn't only playing in the post, but it's not like she was stepping out and like stretching the floor a lot. I mean, she put up 1 3 and missed it. But I think we heard Terry, I think, talk about, she's willing to step out and take that shot. And, but we've heard that before too. Mackenzie Holmes was willing to step out and take that shot, but, we saw it maybe 5 times a season. But I think it's not only about stepping out and stretching the floor. I think there's something to being comfortable stepping out of the arc and playing a little bit of face up, and kind of, that opens up some things that you can run with your sets. And I mean, that was kind of integral to, it wasn't just that every play Mackenzie Holmes was lining up on the block, sticking her arm up, and you feed it to her. I mean, they did everything they needed to do to kind of free her up and get her those one-on-one matchups because she would get double teamed so much. And that might be kind of a difference that you see this year. Other teams were double teaming or triple teaming Mackenzie Holmes every time. You're probably not going to see that against Lily Meister or Caroline Strickland or whoever else they may have in the post, because they don't have to double the post with, maybe Lily has such a good start to the season that they kind of have to adjust and start doing that. But at least early on, you're probably not going to see that many doubling the post. So I do think Lily is going to step out and, play a little bit of face up, and they'll run some sets to get her open and such. And maybe she can step out and take the three. I know Caroline Strickland is a little bit more of a 3-point shooter than Meister is. And I don't think she shot. I don't have the numbers in front of me. I don't think she shot it at a super, super high percentage at Tennessee last year, but I think the volume was there to where you at least have to respect it and not leave her wide open. Because, if you're taking enough of a volume and you leave somebody wide open, they're going to make it more often than obviously if they're guarded. So I think it's going to be a lot of those two. I found it interesting also last night. It looked like Sydney Parrish was flashing down into the post a little bit too, which obviously, the size in women's basketball is such that, Sydney Parrish has always been kind of more of like a wing. But I mean, they look at her as like a stretch four. And so it was interesting seeing her before she got injured last night. You did see her flash into the post and kind of, take some post looks a little bit last night. So I think that's something to watch there too.
Yeah, I think between her and Garzone, they both kind of have that, versatile skill set where they could do that. And the starting lineup with Parrish, Garzone, Chloe Moore McNeil, and Shea Chesky. It seems pretty clear that Terry Morin wants to continue what she's had the last couple of years with 4 shooters on the floor. I think she's going to have that. But I think you raise a great point, Seth, is, how effective are they going to be as a shooting team if they can't, if they're not benefiting from the post doubles that they've had in the last year. I think it's going to be a little bit more of a chess game than it's been in years past, where, you're going to have to go game by game and see how teams are defending you. In years past, I think you knew you were going to get those doubles in the post, and Mackenzie was really good at kicking it out. A
little bit, but also I think, like we said, I think that might just be something that benefits Lily Meister and just kind of lets her settle in. And maybe they, early in the season, just, she talked about last night how she wants to build up her confidence, and that's her biggest thing right now. And maybe that's kind of the biggest emphasis through these first few games is just if Lily is seeing single teams inside, just feeding her and letting her go to work.
Yeah, I got to believe her working with Mackenzie the last couple of years, and even this year, Mackenzie's still with the program. For people that don't know, she's a GA this year, believe it or not, as she readies herself for the WNBA next season, coming off knee surgery. But, basically 3 years working with Mackenzie, I can't imagine a better mentor and tutor in terms of being ready to play the post and step into that role. Shea Chesky's the other one that, I think everybody's going to be paying close attention to, because she's also stepping into a spot that was occupied last year by an all Big Ten performer, Sarah Scalia. Excuse me. What were your takeaways, Owen, with Shea?
Yeah, I think the main thing that I pointed out during the game was how she worked in transition. I think, she's very fast. I'll just put it that way. She is a very, quick player. But she does it on both ways with the ball. She has the ability to facilitate. I think I only had one turnover in transition where she had she had 2. I know one of them was just like a few inches off from reaching Garzone's hand, and it would have been a wide open layup. But
it was 2 of those. It both 2. To Garzone. She overshot both, like 2 passes to Garzone in transition.
Yeah, and those will, open up, and that just comes with reps and playing. But her ability to just speed up the pace on the transition was also very beneficial for Indiana. Quite obviously with the scoreline, but also she filled lanes correctly when she didn't have the ball. She was getting into corners and on the wings very well, kind of hands up, ready to shoot, kind of the basic fundamentals of transition basketball. But, things like that go a long way, especially when you have multiple people that can take the ball up, like Sydney Parrish or Chloe Moore McNeil and Garzone, which she's been acting in more of kind of a point guard role, which we got to see a little bit last night. And so when you have a player like that can, do both things on the transition and kind of beat you in multiple ways, I think that's going to be very beneficial for Terry Morin's squad.
Yeah, Seth, Shea is 5'7", which is not big by high major college basketball standards, but also Tyra Buss was about that same height if I remember right. So it's not like it's impossible to excel, and Chesky's already really a proven player in the Big Ten. It's just a question of how big of a role, how much she's going to be able to do at Indiana. What was your overarching reaction to her last night?
Yeah, I mean, I agreed with Owen that I thought the speed was noticeable in transition. She came in with this reputation of being a great 3-point shooter. And I mean, she went 2 for 5 from beyond the arc last night. I'm sure she's going to have bigger games shooting wise than that. I mean, she definitely looks the part of the shooter. I found her free throw routine a little interesting. I don't know if you weren't watching the game, it's not in like Alexis Bargesser type of way where she has a weird looking actual shot. Her shot looks fine. It's just her routine kind of building up to it. When she bends down to load for her shot, she holds the ball down and she reaches it down so far that she almost touches the ball to the floor, which was a little interesting. I can't remember seeing that. I don't know. I don't think she actually touches the ball to the floor, but she's really, really close to putting the ball on the floor and then pulling up and shooting, which is interesting. So that kind of struck me early on, but I think the speed and transition definitely stuck out to me. And I think to an extent, when you think back on the players of just the last several years on this team, it's an important trait to get on the floor for Terry Morin, is being able to run the floor in transition. Obviously some players are faster than others, and some players can handle the ball a little bit better than others, but just about everybody who's been a regular for this team the last few years can run the floor in transition in some way. And, with their head up, can make a pass, can go in and create for themselves. That's just how this team likes to play. They do like to get out in transition quite a bit. So I think Chesky in that way is going to be an asset for this team. But like you say, the other noticeable thing is definitely, she's short at 5'7". There's going to be games at some point where that could be an issue. And yes, you're right. The Tyra Buss was also, I don't know the exact height, but was also on the shorter side and made up for it. And yeah, Chesky will be, I'm sure that Indiana, knows what they're getting themselves into by bringing in a player like that and adding a player who's 5'7". And obviously Terry Morin has dealt with it before with Tyra Buss, and you can scheme to kind of get her open. I think where I wonder where it could cause some issues is on the defensive side is, when you're going to be when you might be several inches shorter than somebody you're matching up with, at what point does that start to become a problem that you can't really scheme up a way to fix? And at that point, is that something that keeps Chesky off the floor? Is that something that Indiana just kind of concedes, okay, you're going to get this, we're going to take this on the other end? So, that's just maybe a give and take that we'll have to keep an eye out for this season.
Yeah, I looked her up, by the way. She shot 90% from the free throw line last year. So I think we're going to chalk that up as, she knows what she's doing out there in terms of her technique. Seth, what's your general, I know we're way early on this thing, but the Big Ten race is really interesting to me this year because you got obviously Caitlin Clark's out of the league, which kind of levels everything out in my high level estimation. But obviously, Indiana's lost some big stars here the last couple of years. So things have kind of leveled out for them, at least ostensibly. What's your impression of the Big Ten going into this season?
It's going to be really interesting because you come into this season and the two big favorites in the Big Ten are two newcomers, with USC and UCLA are immediately the two favorites in the Big Ten, two of the best teams in the country. USC, I think, is my I think they're number 3 in the country or something like that. And I mean, Juju Watkins is one of the biggest stars of the game now. Maybe, one of the people poised to take that Caitlin Clark mantle, biggest star in the game at USC. And they added Kiki Ariathan from Stanford in the offseason. So, I mean, they're going to be really dangerous. UCLA is also really good. Kiki Rice, really good player there. I think both of them come to Indiana this year. So those are going to be 2 big games to watch for in Bloomington this year. After those 2, Ohio State is probably Ohio State, right there. And then you could probably, I think USC and UCLA are the clear 2 favorites. And then after that, you could probably talk me into any order between Ohio State, Indiana, Maryland, and Iowa. You could probably put those 4 teams in just about any order and come up with a compelling argument for why. I would probably put Ohio State at number 3, and then, it's hard to group some of these teams exactly just because there's a lot of new faces around. When you take Caitlin Clark off of Iowa, it's hard to really, pinpoint what that's going to look like. So I think we're going to need to see a little bit more just from a lot of the different teams around there. But USC and UCLA are definitely the 2 favorites.
I think Ollie's trying to say he thinks you should have Indiana a little bit higher. We welcome Ollie on his regular appearance on the podcast.
No Halloween costume for him.
That's right. He was probably a little bit spooked by Seth's costume.
Yeah.
That's why he didn't show up earlier.
Like, who is this?
So IU women start their season Monday against Brown. That's 7 p.m. Eastern at Simon Scott Assembly Hall. Let's go over to the men's side. They had their first exhibition on Sunday at Tennessee. They're got their second one coming up. We're recording here Thursday morning. They got their second one Friday evening in Bloomington against Marion. I really think I went down to Knoxville for that game. I can tell you that it had the feel of a regular season game in a lot of ways. The crowd was into it. There was probably 15,000 at that game. And when things got intense in the second half, you really couldn't tell a difference between what that environment and any regular season high major college basketball game. It was very intense in the arena, and I thought the guys were playing on both sides like it meant something. I didn't get any like, oh, this is just an exhibition vibe from watching the intensity of the game. The player getting all the buzz from an Indiana standpoint coming out of it was Miles Rice, and I think that's well deserved. I mean, it's just one of those things where going into it, there was a lot of talk about Miles Rice, his speed, his change of pace, his ability to take over games, and he showed it. He definitely impacted the game from start to finish with his ability to score in transition and in clutch moments in the final 2 minutes. Like he made the plays, and what really stood out to me about his performance is who he was doing it against. It was all SEC Defensive Player of the Year Zakai Ziegler. That matchup was so much fun to watch. We're going to get a chance to talk to Miles here this afternoon for a media Q&A, so folks can look for that with him. What I want to ask him is, specifically about that matchup. I like what he got out of it, because it looked like, if I'm Miles Rice, like I learned a lot about myself and my readiness to lead this team by going up against a guy like that in an environment like that. Owen, when you watch Miles Rice, have you seen a point guard for Indiana in any recent vintage years that looked like he looked on Sunday?
I mean, the thing that stood out to me was mainly his speed. I mean, we heard all about it in the preseason, how fast he was with the ball and even without the ball. But I mean, his just ability to just push the pace in transition was really noticeable, especially in that first half when they had a lot of points kind of in transition. If I had to do a comparison, I mean, Xavier Johnson kind of looked that part, kind of the first 2 years. Obviously, it didn't really pan out that well, but I mean, his ability to really like use his speed with the ball was kind of, beneficial in the first 2 years. And this recent year, obviously his minutes went down, but when you have someone like that who draws so much attention to you when you're in transition and when you have the ball in your hands, to where those things that you can dump down to Malik Renew or find a player on the wing, that's something that Indiana kind of missed last season with just teams weren't really worried about anyone on Indiana's roster so much that they had to make a point of emphasis to stop the ball so quickly. So and with that, even Miles Rice still had a really good game, and like you said, he went up against one of the best perimeter defenders in college basketball for sure. So I think the fact that he draws so much attention to him is going to be really, really good for Indiana, because we know that he can facilitate and kind of play off of that.
Yeah, and I thought, the Xavier Johnson comparison is interesting, because I thought, I would agree that, just from a pure speed standpoint, there's probably not much difference in the two, but it's the way that Rice plays at speed, the way that he changes speed. Like, one thing that really stood out to me is like his going from 60 miles an hour to 100 miles an hour is just in the blink of an eye. Like that,
Yeah.
It's like on those high ball screens where he was kind of setting up and reading the ball screen, and all of a sudden he was in the paint, and Ziegler or no one else was staying in front of him. I think they were trying to hard hedge him on those sometimes. Ziegler was trying to fight through. Sometimes it really didn't matter. He can get to his spots and control the game at the speed that he wants to play, at a level that I think is a little bit different than what we saw from X the last few years. It's it's the ability to play under control at speed that seems to be different. I know it's all easy to say right now, Seth, that one exhibition in that, oh my God, Indiana's got their next Yogi Ferrell, but to my eye, because of the situation, it wasn't just like a 95-27 exhibition against Marywood. It was a real opponent against a real defender, and he looked, he looked ready to step into a big time role for Indiana this year. And point guard under Mike Woodson is really everything. He asks point guards to do so much, and he looks ready for it, in my opinion.
Yeah, I mean, honestly, I thought about the Xavier Johnson comparison too. Like that popped into my head, and it's more, I think the way to put it is like what we saw from Miles Rice. And obviously, we'll need to see it on a consistent basis to really, formalize that comparison. But it's kind of like, the idea of Xavier Johnson, I think, was often better than what we actually got from Xavier Johnson on a night-to-night basis. Like, I think what we saw from Miles Rice was that kind of idealized version of Xavier Johnson, like what everybody thought, this is what Xavier Johnson is. This is what he can do for Indiana's offense. I think that's a lot of what we saw from Miles Rice against Tennessee. I mean, just the speed he played with, the way that he was able to, like you said, kind of goes from 0 to 100 really quickly, just in transition or in the half court or whatever it is. And just the ease. And just Indiana's offense looked so much more smooth when he was running the show. And that's one of those things where sometimes the stats can't really quantify something like that, but you know it when you see it. And I mean, if you were watching that game, like, it just looked a lot more smooth when Miles Rice was running the show, because he was just able to get to the paint, get to the rim so easily. And it just opened up so much more. I mean, this is the type of player that Indiana has needed the last few years. And like Owen said, just the way that will force defenses to kind of draw attention to him can open up things for other players. I think you're also going to be quickly talking about, obviously, Indiana's got better 3-point shooting on this roster, and that's going to draw more attention elsewhere. I mean, we talked a bunch the last few years that you got to at least have more threats on the outside to shoot, right, to be able to force the defense to actually respect your shooters out there. And now I think between Carlisle and Luke Goody, and you're going to have Mbako probably shooting a higher volume of 3-pointers this year among all the other guys, I think you at least have the more threats from outside the arc. And when you combine that with Miles Rice and not even talking about what you have in Umar Ballo inside, I think you're starting to see the recipe for what could be a good IU basketball team.
Yeah, no doubt. And I don't think we're trying to throw any shade Xavier Johnson's way. I think
No.
the end of the 21-22 season, his first season at IU, he was playing at an all Big Ten level there for a while. Part of his shortcomings were, injury related. I don't think he could ever get into a rhythm last year.
I think a lot of it was injury related.
Yeah.
I don't think we meant that. I don't think there was any disrespect meant by comparing Miles Rice to him or calling him the idealized version of Xavier Johnson. And we still saw those flashes from him at times last season.
Right.
It was just inconsistent, and a lot of that had to do with the injuries and all the missed time.
Yeah, there was one possession in the second half where Rice got into the paint and he just kind of started almost dribbling in a circle around the paint, and like everybody else was just kind of standing there. It was almost like a Harlem Globetrotters routine. I mean, the guy just moves at a different pace than everybody else on the floor, and it's going to be a lot of fun to watch. The other guy that I'm picking up development from a skill standpoint, from an athleticism standpoint, is Malik Reneau. It's not like like eye-catching or eye-popping, but watching the guy now for a third year, there are little subtleties you can see. He's handling the ball better. He's beating guys off the dribble from the perimeter. Made a massive three in that game. I think the biggest question continues to be for me, for Indiana, is can they play with Reneau and Ballo together, and how much? I still have that question, but if Reneau can almost kind of play that point forward role that he looked like a little bit on Sunday, I think it goes a long way towards making that lineup when they are together work a lot better. What did you see out of Malik Reneau on Sunday, Owen?
Yeah, I think you said it great. I think you kind of just start to pick up on things, like little subtleties that he's improved on. And for me, it's what you said. It's handling the ball. I think he has gotten, probably a little bit of a confidence boost, but also just, being able to be trusted on the perimeter in transition when he has the rebound. Just he's also going to be a guy that can maybe kind of push the pace for Indiana and run things on their own possession. But Malik, I think it was in the first half, he had kind of like he drove to the right elbow, kind of like hit a behind the back and then a turnaround jumper, and that was, if he can do that on a consistent basis, look out. But just to be able to have that confidence, I think is huge for Malik, because like you said, he's always been this kind of developmental guy that's just gotten better and better at certain little things here and there. But I think the ability to handle the ball, and for him just, having a little bit more confidence in doing that, I think is going to really stand out. And like you said, him playing with Ballo, if he can kind of draw his defender out a little more, and maybe Ballo has a little bit more space in the paint, it's going to open up, again, a lot of possibilities for Indiana going forward.
Yeah, another possession that stood out to me with Reneau, Ballo was out on the top guarding a high ball screen with Reneau guarding the block, and Reneau got the rebound, defensive rebound, and he just brought it up himself. And because Ballo was already out at the top, he was able to seal his man on fast break, and Reneau brought it all the way up and just did a post entry. It was probably like a 3 or 4 second possession, and Ballo got a layup. That can be something that's very effective when Ballo's out on the top of the defense guarding high ball screens, because nobody's going to fight through position once he has it against Ballo. So, Reneau's ability to not have to find a guard to get the fast break going and just bring it up and set up the offense, I think is a pretty key thing for them going forward. Seth, one of the things I was also really interested in watching that was, how they were going to go about rotations. Didn't really get to see it too much because both Galloway and Bryson Tucker didn't play, and I think they're obviously going to be in the rotation, probably part of the first 3 guys off the bench, as best I can tell. But the first substitution of the game was Luke Goody coming in for Ballo and moving Reneau to the 5. To me, that's at least what I want to see a lot more of with this team. What are your obviously way too early, but what are your thoughts about rotations for Indiana? What's your assessment of their ability to go a little bit smaller this year?
Like we had talked about, I mean, they have the pieces that we kind of started to see what the recipe looks like. As far as actual rotations, it's hard for me to really make a lot of concrete takeaways. I think the starting lineup that we saw from in that game looks like a pretty clear starting lineup for Indiana, with Rice, Renew, Carlisle, Ballo, and Ibaka. Beyond that, I mean, it's hard for me to really read too much into, Luke Goody was the first off the bench, because that might be Trey Galloway when Trey Galloway is healthy. And, I think, when you're talking about pecking order and things like that, you may not really know what that rotation looks like until you get to January, because you only have a few real non-conference tests this year. And I'm sure that, obviously, I'm sure, Woodson is going to be using the first couple months of the season to continue to evaluate some of his players. He's not that they don't have an idea already of what they're working with, but, as far as the rotation and kind of trimming things down, I mean, going into the season last year, none of us really pegged Anthony Leal as being a real contributor for the team. Right. And Anthony Leal worked his way into the rotation, by the end of the year. So some of that just is going to work itself out naturally, but I think it's hard for me to really draw a lot of takeaways on the rotation when, like I said, I think we have a clear starting lineup and one that makes sense and one that can be very good. Beyond that, it's, when you're missing Bryson Tucker and Trey Galloway, it's hard for me to really look at things and say, I think Luke Goody is a real potential first guy off the bench. I think so can Trey. I think Galloway can too. We've heard nothing but really good things about Bryson Tucker. So I'm really eager to see, when he's available to play, like what he looks like and what the game plan is with him.
Yeah. And I think, just observations very early on this team, I think Kane and Carlisle might just be the X factor for this whole team, because I think it's really hard to be an elite high major college basketball team without a dynamic 3-level scorer at the 2. I think he has the ability to do that. He's, he posted a 30 and 28 point game last year, if I'm remembering correctly. So that ability is there. But, you heard Woodson on Sunday. He kind of hinted that Carlisle's still kind of trying to figure things out. So I think it's going to be interesting to watch his progression over the course of the year, because I think they're going to need him to have a big scoring role and, really kind of stretch the defense to really make this all work. I really like what they've got everywhere else on the floor in terms of potential, but it's that 2 spot that leaves me a little bit uncertain about the direction the season could go. Friday night, you have Pat Knight returning to Simon Scott Assembly Hall. I believe it's the first time he's been there since his dad came back in 2020 for that very famous day in IU basketball history. He's bringing his Marion Knights. I think his dad would enjoy tomorrow night watching his son coach on the sidelines against Mike Woodson, who was, one of his favorite players and favorite people. So just kind of a neat moment. You also have Steve Downing, who's the AD at Marion, who will be there, who's another one of Bob Knight's favorite people. So just kind of a neat situation for Indiana. I don't think that there's too much to assess about this game. At least I think everybody hopes not. I think, Seth, you reminded me of this the other day, that last year's exhibition with Marion, what was it? Indiana was up 2 at halftime.
That was against Indy. I think it was against the University of Indianapolis.
Okay. Yeah. So, I mean, if we're being honest with ourselves about last season, the red flags were there in the exhibition in that game. And so, if that's another reason why I thought the Tennessee game was promising, because I think Tennessee's obviously good. They're a good defensive team. They tested Indiana, and Indiana found a way to win that.
And let's be clear. I think there were a lot, while there was the atmosphere and a lot of, the atmosphere, and it felt like a regular season game, and it wasn't an effort thing. I still think there were a lot of moments where it looked like both of these teams were playing their first, semi-competitive basketball game in a long time. And there's a lot of things that they had to work out. And it's still an exhibition game in that sense. Like, it's preseason, and for as good a defensive team as Tennessee can be, there were moments where they probably lapsed. As good a shooting team as Indiana could be, they went 0 for 11 from 3-point range in the first half. And especially that first half, I think there were a lot of moments where, it felt pretty clear, like this is a preseason game.
Yeah, and I think Tennessee missed a ton of open threes in that game. Like that, it could have gone very different if Tennessee was making threes, especially in the first half. I think they could have opened up a sizable lead.
And it felt like Umar Bala was missing a lot inside of easy looks that he'll normally knock down.
Yeah, very true as well. If I still have concerns about Indiana at this point in time, it's their perimeter defense coming out of that Tennessee game. I thought there was a lot of open looks that could have made that go a very different way. So, I don't think they're going to win 95-27 on Friday night like the women did, but I think as long as they, play in a much more convincing fashion than they did in their exhibitions last year, and, get a lot of guys out on the floor. I think, we might be able to pick up a few things from tomorrow night going into their opener on Wednesday against SIU Edwardsville, also in Bloomington. Want to go to next to football. We are in the thick of the busiest time of year for IU athletics, and it feels funny to talk third about an 8-0 football team who's in contention for the Big Ten championship and the CFP. But that the headline right now with IU football going out to Michigan State on Saturday is the health of Kurtis Rourke. Just no doubt about that. All signs at this point in time are suggesting that he's going to try to play on Saturday. My biggest question is, if I say the two things that stand out to me the most about Kurtis Rourke, it is his ability to dissect the defense kind of at the line of scrimmage. Like he knows exactly where he wants to go with the football. He's kind of unflappable with that part of his game. And then his accuracy when he throws the ball, those are the two things that stand out the most to me. I think he'll be fine with his reads at the line of scrimmage, but it's his accuracy. If his thumb is in his head at all playing on Saturday, if he does play, that's where I would have concern, especially being on the road in a tough environment. I mean, there's no reason to question the guy. He's been exceptional. He's in the Heisman conversation legitimately at this point, but there is at least, a dynamic at play there with the thumb, Owen, that you wonder, if he's thinking about it at all, if he has like any kind of special, bandage or wrap or anything on it at least comes into play.
Yeah, and you bring up a big point. It's really kind of maybe a mental thing, and like you said, the accuracy could maybe see some shades of where he doesn't want it to be. But the thing about Kurtis Rourke that I think kind of is really a standout trait, and one that we've talked about, I think, on the podcast multiple times. I mean, his mental focus and his ability to just kind of be comfortable in these high pressure situations has really, at least what it's been told to us, has really been a key factor with his success. So I think, if in the mental aspect of that, if Kurtis is able to kind of just like put that to the side and be like, hey, let's go win a football game away at Michigan State, I think maybe there's not even a misstep. But like you said, it's kind of just that thing where, if it's bothering you and it starts to get in your head, if throws start to go awry or, you can't make your hits, then it can kind of sneak into his mind. But I think Kurtis Rourke mentally is not that kind of player. And I think at least what it looks like right now, he should not miss a ton of steps in his return. And I think, Indiana is on track to take another win.
Injuries are unique, though. I mean, they do introduce a mental aspect to the game that, even a guy like him, I'm not saying he's going to be mentally impacted by it, but I don't know that we've seen enough from him one way or another to make that assessment. I mean, I know his stats in 2023 were not as good as they were in 22 as he came off late season knee surgery. So I guess maybe that's one clue, although it's obviously night and day difference between knee surgery and whatever thumb issue he has. You know, Seth, I guess as you look at this game, you know, if he were not to play and they went back to Taven, like how much of a drop off have you seen with Taven at the helm the last couple of weeks? I mean, pure stats, like I believe I added this up. I think Indiana's outscored their opponents 59 to 17 when Taven played, and you know he threw in one interception, but I think there was clear pass interference on that interception. Probably still threw the ball in a place where it shouldn't have gone, but he hasn't been bad. But I think the fact that they ran the football so much against Washington was kind of a tell with what the staff was thinking about where that whole situation is. But what do you think? You know, if they do go back to Taven, how much does that change your outlook for Saturday?
It definitely changes the outlook because I guess there's a number of different things I can go to here. Number one, I think when you're looking at the decision, you know, a potential decision for whether or not to play Rourke, this staff doesn't strike me as the type that's going to play games with it and say, oh, we think we can beat Michigan State even without Rourke, so we're going to keep him out a week and make sure he's all good for the last few games of the season. The staff doesn't strike me as the type to do that sort of thing. I think if Rourke is available to play, he's going to play. That's just kind of my gut feeling here. If he's available to play, I think he's going to play, because especially when you think about, you know, there's added importance to these games now when you look at the postseason picture. Not that they would, you know, should be viewing it any differently because of that, but, you know, I think if Rourke is available to play, he's going to play, number one. Number two, one of the things you said about when you're talking about Taven is everything for me. It's the decision making. And I think that's one of Rourke's biggest strengths that may not have been mentioned here yet. I mean, throughout the whole season, I could count on one hand the number of times, I could probably count on one hand the number of passes that Kurtis Rourke has made where I'm like, that's kind of a dangerous throw, or maybe he shouldn't have done that. And there were 3, 4, 5 of those from Taven Jackson just against Washington. Yeah. And he threw the one interception, but there were at least 2 or 3 other throws he made that easily could have been intercepted. Right. And just throws that he should not have been making, or decisions that he should not have been making, or decisions that he should have handled differently. And, you know, whether, and that might also be in some things that, you know, maybe aren't with throwing. I mean, we talked about all day that, you know, I was talking to, you know, people next to me in the press box that I guess I don't know for sure if they were calling RPOs throughout the game or if it was just, you know, straight run calls, but Taven had the running lane available to him all game long. And he waited until he only ran it. He only attempted 6 rushes and he only really pulled it down, you know, on one of those RPO type plays once. And he scored a touchdown on that by the goal line. But it just makes you wonder, if those really are the option RPOs, like, was he just not seeing the running lane? Is he just kind of defaulting to handing off? And, you know, is he confident enough in that ability to kind of go get those 6-7 yards? It's just decisions like that aren't necessarily just, oh, he threw that pass that could have been intercepted. Like, just the decision-making, I think, has always been there with Kurtis Rourke. And I think there's a level of comfort that, you know, as much as Indiana very clearly has a lot of confidence in Taven Jackson, as they should, I think he didn't look bad. Let's make that clear. I don't think Taven played poorly. They just he didn't have to do, he hasn't had to do a lot, is the thing, because he entered against Nebraska and he didn't, you know, he entered in the second half against Nebraska already ahead 28-7, and he didn't take his first snap in that game until, you know, his first snap in that game came in the red zone because it was after Sean Asbury's huge interception return. And so he, you know, you come in with a 21-point lead and you're already in the red zone, you score another touchdown, you know, and again, he made some nice throws and looked good, but he just didn't have to, you don't have to do a lot. There's not a lot of mental stress on you there. There's not, you're not feeling like, you know, the pressure in that sort of situation. And obviously, you get to Kurt Cignetti's fighting human nature, yada, yada. But it's just not the same. And you get to Washington, and they ran the ball, 52 times that game and only threw it 19. And
right.
Yeah, he threw a touchdown, he threw an interception, and there were some mistakes there. But I think that's and also, to be fair, Washington's secondary Washington's defensive line is good, and that was probably the best defense Indiana's played so far this season. Washington's defense was pretty impressive, and I think going into that game, we expected the secondary to give them a good challenge, so that might have been part of the reason for that game plan as well. But that's kind of telling to me, where if you're going to run it that much when you've had Rourke in there, it's been a pretty balanced offense between run and pass. So as far as the specific matchup against Michigan State, do I think Indiana can still go in there and win with Taven? Yeah, I do. I think they can. And I would say they probably would still be favorites, on the spread, even with. But I think if you're looking at it, if Taven is the quarterback here, this might be the closest game Indiana's played this season.
Yeah, I think it's easy to overlook Michigan State because they're 4-4. But if you look at their losses, Oregon, Ohio State, at Michigan, the one kind of head scratcher is Boston College, but I believe that was on the road, if I'm remembering right. So,
and even that Michigan game, they should have won that game. Like
right,
statistically,
they
statistically they outplayed Michigan, and they wound up on the wrong side of the scoreboard.
Yeah, I looked last night when the latest Rourke update came out, which that update, if people don't know, is that he's expected to start, or that may not have been the exact wording, but he's at least on track to start. I think the line was -8. I assume that kind of got baked in because I think they opened more like 7 or so. So, Indiana's going to go up there favored, assuming he does start, but it's definitely going to, quarterback is going to be the thing to watch that entire game, no matter how it goes. I wanted to touch on the college football playoff. I don't know if you guys paid attention to this yesterday, but the CFP had a media press conference when they kind of just provided an overview of, how they go about, rankings, which come out next Tuesday for the first time. They're going to put out their own top 25 and then how those rankings feed into the bracket. One thing that stood out to me is that they said that they're going to place a heavy emphasis on strength of schedule when they do this. They don't consider the AP poll or the coaches poll, which has Indiana at number 13 and thus out of the CFP. But I think that those polls, the AP and coaches, are pretty heavily influenced by strength of schedule as well. The one thing that might be different about the CFP is I think the AP and coaches kind of there's a problem with those polls, and I think Joel Klatt was saying this yesterday, that wherever you're ranked to start the season, you have to overcome that. Like there's no like, okay, let's just take a fresh look in week 9 and say, okay, Indiana, they have top scoring margin in the country. They're dominating everybody they play. They're probably number 5. No, Indiana started outside the top 25. In a lot of people's eyes, they were like 80th or 90th, and they incrementally have had to work their way up. And like last week, I don't think anyone or not anyone significant in front of them lost, so they didn't move. So it's just like this old school way to think about it. So I think it's going to be very interesting when that first CFP poll comes out next week, which is really going to become the only poll that matters anymore. Is Indiana going to be looked at kind of the same way in that number 13 neighborhood, assuming they win and are 9-0 at that point? Or is the committee going to slot them higher? It's funny, Owen, to even be talking about the CFP at this point. I was kind of, as I was watching that press conference yesterday, I was thinking, this is so weird to be legitimately sitting here watching CFP stuff as a guy who covers Indiana, although I was doing it 4 years ago. But even 4 years ago felt nothing like it feels now. What's your take, Owen, on rankings right now? Do you feel like they've got Indiana right in the 13th spot, or do you think we're going to see something totally different on Tuesday?
I mean, it's so tough because, I mean, you kind of look at 13 and a lot of people were really upset about it online, but you got to remember your Indiana football, and 13th ranked is like that's like winning a national championship for Indiana. So I mean, I think it makes sense, but I also can see the part where you would say, hey, Notre Dame is ranked so high, but they lost to Northern Illinois at home. Why are they ranked above Indiana? That's like been the most main argument that I've seen.
Mhm.
So in terms of strength of schedule, I mean, a lot of games that we thought were going to be like a lot closer obviously didn't happen. Like I think the Nebraska one was the most telling of that, where Nebraska has been receiving votes throughout weeks, and Indiana kind of had their way with them 56-7. So the strength of schedule may not play well in Indiana's hands just because of the performance of some other teams. But those are still good teams. And you look at Michigan State, like you said, I mean, 4-4, but a lot of those games were against really, really good opponents or games that they should have pulled out and probably won. Michigan obviously has been, one of the biggest storylines in college football, where their season probably could have gone a completely different direction if they just figured out their quarterback. And then Ohio State, Ohio State is Ohio State, and then Purdue is kind of at the bottom tier of college football as a whole. So, I mean, in terms of factoring that in, Indiana may not be as favored in that sense, but again, they have not lost a game this season, and they have shown that they are one of the most high-powered offenses in college football. So, I mean, it makes sense that they're trying to put an emphasis on the strength of schedule, just with how many teams are getting into. Now you add, what is it, 8 more teams to the college football playoffs. So that's going to be a huge emphasis when you're trying to narrow down those top tier teams. But I mean, you just have to consider what Indiana is doing, that they're not only are they beating these opponents, but they're dominating them. And that's something that you have to probably try to, take into account, is the strength of schedule. Also, like the margin of victory, I think is something that you also have to keep in mind.
Yeah, I think that's spot on. It's not a fluky 8-0. They have, if I'm not mistaken, they have the highest scoring margin in the country right now. I think, beating a team like Nebraska 59-7, and then seeing Nebraska take Ohio State down to the wire the next weekend,
Yeah,
has to be compelling. But I do feel like, Seth, that despite that, Indiana is in a little bit of a catch-22 here, because nothing with the remaining schedule is going to massively boost their strength of schedule except Ohio State. And if they lose that game, then it's going to be like, oh, well, there you go. They didn't play anybody, and then they lost to Ohio State. So I don't know that they're in a position to dramatically in change the perception, if people do have that perception, unless they go to Columbus and win.
Yeah, I mean, you're right. I think when the polls come out, we'll find out. With Indiana, it's going to be just as much. It'll be telling in some ways how highly or not highly they think of Nebraska, and how they view that big win over Nebraska, how they view the win over Washington, how if Indiana beats Michigan State this weekend, how they view that Michigan State team. Michigan is 5-3 right now, so it's been I know there's been a lot of it's been a disappointing year in Ann Arbor in terms of what they're used to football wise, but that's still a game that can help boost the strength of schedule a little bit. And Ohio State for sure is the big fish on the schedule. It's just interesting, you can look at the strength of schedule and say, Indiana is dominating teams are 8-0. They, but they haven't played anybody top notch, yada, yada. And obviously, there's the Notre Dame. Owen brought up Notre Dame sitting ahead of Indiana in the poll, number 8, having lost to Northern Illinois, but they also have a win at Texas A&M that's a lot better than anything Indiana's been able to do. And some of that just is luck, luck of the draw, strength is, because it's not like Indiana has that much control in how their schedule shakes out. I mean, these non-conference games, aside from canceling the Louisville game, the non-conference schedule gets set far in advance. And to be honest, it's not like Louisville has been crushing it this season anyway. So keeping that game on the schedule wouldn't have done that much. Keeping that, it wouldn't have done that much for
Could be interesting though
here compared to what it could be
if Indiana's really right on the margin on strength of schedule. That Louisville game could end up being what could have made the difference, which is pretty damn funny.
But even so, that was a Tom Allen decision. That wasn't anything Kurt Cignetti did. So it's just something that they only have so much control over, and they only have so much control over their Big Ten slate. Who they get from the Big Ten draw and how those teams fare this season. You keep winning enough games and you're going to force yourself into the conversation. That's how Indiana has to be looking at this thing. Is it doesn't really matter, what you think the strength of schedule is, because if they're sitting there at the end of the season, 11-1, you're going to have to put Indiana in that conversation at the very least, if they're 11-1. And it's also, there's a lot of teams, everybody that's above them is either undefeated or a one-loss team. And as through the last month of the season, there's going to be some more attrition in that sense. I mean, you have Penn State playing Ohio State this weekend, and if you stick a second loss on Ohio State, that could be pretty damaging for the Buckeyes. And, there's going to be more of these teams that are going to be playing each other, whether on the regular season schedule or you look at the conference championship games that'll pop up. And you can make an argument that, maybe those shouldn't count for at-large resumes for, the playoff for an at-large team, but they still might. And, in terms of a tiebreaker, if you end up with, say, like an 11-2 Ohio State in theory versus an 11-1 Indiana, what happens there? And, does Indiana, where would Indiana fall if they don't make the Big Ten title game compared to teams that pick up a second loss in their conference championship game? Like that's, there's just some interesting layers that will start to unfold this week.
And I think last night watching that, I was reminded, and this may not be on a lot of people's radar, so I thought I would mention it. The first round CFP games are on campus. So also at play is a potential home game for Indiana in the CFP, which is just, we think we've already seen the biggest possible game day environments we could imagine, but I think that would even take it to another level, which is hard to believe at this point.
They would have to be seeded 5 through 8 or if they were able to go to Indy and win the Big Ten,
right
in those top 4. I guess they wouldn't even get a campus game if they're in the top 4. They just go straight to they
get a first round bye.
straight to the quarters. So to get a home game, you need to be seeded 5 through 8 as an at-large.
Right. Lots of play out there, but it starts with Michigan State on Saturday, which I think could be a potentially very tough game. I think it's going to be a lot like Washington in terms of, physical, a little bit lower scoring, with the Rourke wild card out there. Want to wrap up, but before we do that, want to mention IU men's soccer. A little bit of a mea culpa for me. If I've got any regrets about our coverage at the Daily Hoosier, it's that we don't do anywhere near justice to the IU men's soccer program. If we were organizing our coverage based on the quality of the programs and the level of coverage that deserved, I think they'd be above and beyond anything else that we do. They this week won their 19th Big Ten regular season title in the 34 years that the Big Ten has been a sponsor for Big Ten's men's soccer. So I did the math. That's like 57% of the Big Ten titles Indiana's won. That's insane. I want to say nobody saw this coming this year, but that sounds ridiculous based on the way I just set that up. But they started, I think it was 1-1-2 in the Big Ten, and were several points behind. But they finished 6 straight wins overall, 5 straight wins in the Big Ten, and they're not just winning; they're kind of like the IU football winning. They're blowing people out. 6-1 win over Northwestern, which is kind of like a 59-7 win in football to some extent. What's interesting right now about IU men's soccer, as best I can remember, through the years with both Yeagley's at the helm. They were dominant from start to finish in seasons. The last 2 seasons have been very similar, where they got off to kind of slow starts based on their standards, and found their way and hit a groove. And now they're probably one of the hottest teams in the country, competing to be seeded for the NCAA tournament. And probably going to be, a true contender to go back to the College Cup, at least the way they look at this moment. I think, I don't know what you guys think. My best estimation of what's going on there is just the change with the transfer portal. They're bringing in a lot more transfers. They don't have the continuity from year to year. And I think Todd Yeagley kind of seems like he's okay with that, just kind of, finding their way, not getting too worried about some early season ties or losses, and just getting into the groove in October. Which back-to-back years they found that groove in October, and generally they're always good in October. But it just stands out this year because I think the last couple of years people were kind of thinking, what's wrong with IU men's soccer? And at this moment, I would tell you nothing is wrong with IU men's soccer. Do either one of you? I know we don't, like I said at the jump there, we don't do it service, but are either one of you guys paying enough attention to add to what I'm saying there?
I will say I had the call on Tuesday for WIUX, and I mean 6-1. There's not much you can say to that, especially for soccer. Like you said, it's kind of 56-7 victory in football, but I mean they're very well coached. I mean, you can see that it's kind of like, I mean, it's Todd Yeagley. He's been so successful, but that obviously comes from the range of Jerry Yeagley and all of that. So, I mean, it's just there's such a well-coached team. And I'll even point out in 2022, when they made the College Cup final, they also had kind of a slower start. I think they sat around like 3-5 before they went on a really good run and finished out that season well. So, I mean, this is no kind of, I guess, unfamiliar territory for this team. And I think that's also a kind of a good thing to point out, is that they're able to go on these runs and kind of have their way in the Big Ten to boost their resume and like you said, maybe make another return to the College Cup. So, but going back to the coach thing, I mean, they dominated possession that entire game. They had their way with Northwestern's defense, who coming into that game had allowed the least amount of goals in the Big Ten during Big Ten play. And one of their defenders was a all Big Ten first team selection last year. They brought a few guys in from the transfer portal. That was very good. So, I mean, when you do that against a really good defense, that puts you on the map for sure. So, I mean, it's just again a testament to how well they're coached, how well head coach Todd Yeagley can make like adjustments mid-season and kind of figure things out, and kind of had that strong finish has been apparent throughout the past few seasons. And I definitely saw that on Tuesday. It was a really fun game to call and a lot of action. So it was good.
I'm guessing there's a lot of teams around the country that hope Indiana gets seeded and host early in the NCAA tournament, because I don't think anybody wants IU thrown in their bracket. I think last year they weren't seeded, and I think they were clearly the best team. I can't even remember whose bracket they went in. Might have been Wake Forest or Virginia, but it's a little bit of a disservice at this point based on the way they're playing. If they base it on full body of work, there might be some questions. Obviously, there's still the Big Ten tournament to go that will have a say in that, but I don't think too many teams want to see Indiana in their bracket in the early rounds. Seth, anything to add? I know, and I'm putting you on the spot there, and have not asked you to cover them, but I know you're a fan of the sport. So, anything to add there?
This just is kind of what Yeagley does. Like, he gets the guys going at the right time of year, and like you said, it's been that way for the last several years at this point. And it's not always a start to finish dominating season, but I mean, they went to the College Cup final a couple years ago, and there were similar questions kind of being asked, early in the season. Are they still got it? Are they going to be all right? And they just kind of get it together when it starts to count most in October. And they'll flip over the calendar in November, and I mean, it seems like they've got as good a shot as anybody to make a run.
Okay. Owen, do you have one of those study later towels?
Study later. No, I didn't get one. Actually, I might have one upstairs, but I will have to be quick and run it up if you guys want to.
No, I don't want to
eliminate some
see it.
time.
I don't want to see it. I just want you to embrace it because your
Oh, yeah.
class schedule is cutting into our podcast time.
I'm embracing it.
Okay.
For sure.
Podcast now, study later. Okay.
Exactly.
All right. Well, for Owen Graham, Seth Tao, this is Mike Schumann of the Daily Hoosier. We will catch you all the next time on East 17th Street.